Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and in today's video we are going to be looking at the human nervous system. So we're going to start with the central nervous system, and the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. Please do not just say spine in your exam, it is wrong, it's spinal cord. And the brain is enclosed by the skull, basically meaning that your skull covers or protects the brain, and the spinal cord by the vertebral column. Now, before we go into the spinal cord, the brain, reflex action, we first need to look at the three different types of nervous tissue or neurons that we have in order to understand the brain, the reflex action, and the spinal cord. Right, so the three different types of neurons that you have to know, or the nervous tissue that you have to know, is the sensory, connector/inter, and motor neurons. So the first one is the sensory neuron, and this transmits impulses from the sense organs or the receptors to the brain and the spinal cord. And the easiest way to identify a sensory neuron is by looking at that part over there. It's the only neuron that has that part over there. Then the connector/interneuron, it links the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. And then we have the motor neuron, which transmits impulses from the brain and the spinal cord to the muscles, which causes the body to respond or react to a situation. We're going to be looking at a diagram of the structure of a motor neuron. So we're going to start with this side of the diagram. So cytoplasm, nucleus, cell body. If you've been doing life sciences since grade 10, I think these words should not be new to you. However, if you have forgotten them, it's not a problem. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is the cytoplasm, which is the part that I highlighted there as blue, and its function is that it contains the fine neurofibrils that extend into the axon and the dendrites. Then also we have this part over here called the nucleus, and the nucleus controls all the cell's functions. All right, and then now what covers or is the outline of that, we have, it's called the cell body, and its function is basically that it consists of the cytoplasm and the nucleus. Okay, now these parts here that are highlighted as green, they are called dendrites, and they transmit impulses toward the cell body of the neuron. Okay, then now we're going to go further down, and we have these parts here that are highlighted as yellow on the outside. It looks like bumps almost. Those are called myelin sheaths, and their function is that they provide electrical insulation, and it speeds up the impulses that are moving toward the axon. Now we've been seeing this word axon for quite a bit of times here. What is it? The axon is in between the myelin sheaths, and its job is to transmit impulses away from the cell body of the neuron. So that is the structure of the motor neuron that you have to know. You have to know each part, and you have to know what purpose they serve. Okay, so now that we've looked at the different types of neurons, you now know how to label a diagram of a motor neuron. We can now start with the brain. Now, if you were to go into Google and type in a picture of the brain, this is not really what would normally pop up. This is because this is a brain that has been cut in half, and you are seeing the inside of one half, or one hemisphere, if that makes sense. Okay, so we're going to start with the part that I highlighted as yellow. That is called the cerebrum, and it controls the voluntary actions. Now, before we go on, voluntary actions are basically actions that you yourself can control. You decide to use your hand, which has muscles, to pick up a pen. Let's say you want to take that pen and walk out of the room. That is you who decided to do that. It's not an automatic thing that your body does. Okay, we're going to get to the automatic part. And the cerebrum also receives and interprets sensations from the sense organs, and it is in charge of the higher thought processes. Okay, now we're going to move on to here, which is the purple part, which is the cerebellum or cerebellum, however your teacher pronounces it. And it coordinates all voluntary movement, and it also controls muscle tension to maintain balance. Okay, now we're going to go to the part that I highlighted as pink, the medulla oblongata. This transmits nerve impulses between the spinal cord and the brain. This whole part here is called the brain, and the part that I highlighted here as red going down, that is what we call the spinal cord. So the medulla oblongata is this part over here. It is between the brain and the spinal cord. That's why it transmits impulses between the two. And it also controls involuntary actions such as heartbeat and breathing. Involuntary actions are basically automatic actions that your body does for you. You do not have to think of doing it. For example, you don't have to think of blinking, you don't have to think of breathing, you don't have to think of your heart beating. All of those things are automatic actions or movements, or not really movements, actions that your body does for you. You do not have to think of it, as opposed to voluntarily, where you decide, I want to do this. Okay? Now we're going to move on to the part that is highlighted as blue, that is the hypothalamus, and that controls your hunger, your thirst, your sleep, your body temperature, and your emotions. Then the part that is highlighted as green is called the corpus callosum, and that connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain. If you remember in geography where you learnt about the northern and southern hemisphere of the earth, basically the same thing here. The brain is divided into the left and right hemispheres. So the corpus callosum is responsible for allowing for communication to happen between the two hemispheres. Okay? Then the part there that I highlighted as orange is called the pituitary gland. There is no function of it there, however, I'm still going to tell you. Its sole purpose that you need to know is that it releases hormones. Okay? That is the pituitary gland. Right, so now that we've looked at the brain, we can now focus on the spinal cord. Remember, it's not just the spine, it's the spinal cord. Now, at a grade 12 level, all you need to know is to label the diagram correctly and know what part represents what in a spinal cord. You do not have to know every single function of the parts in the spinal cord. However, since we've already looked at the neurons, you should know what an interneuron is, a sensory neuron, and a motor neuron. However, all the other stuff, you just need to know how to label them correctly. Okay, so we're basically going to start with this side of the diagram, because this side is basically a copy and paste of the left side. Okay, so the part there that I highlighted as blue, inside, that is what we call the sensory neuron. And if you remember the sensory neuron, what does it do? It transmits impulses toward the spinal cord. Okay? And then surrounding the sensory neuron, we have something called the dorsal root. Okay? The dorsal root. Remember, I also told you, this is just a tip, how to identify a sensory neuron is with that bump over there. Here it is again. So if they were to give you this diagram in the exam and you don't know what that is, just look for that and you're going to know it's the sensory neuron that is inside the dorsal root. Okay? Then, as we go inside now, we have something again called what? The interneuron, which connects what? The sensory neuron and the motor neuron. After that, we're going to go back out where we meet the motor neuron, which transmits impulses away from the brain and the spinal cord to the muscles in order for an action to occur. And surrounding the motor neuron, we have something called the ventral root. Please do not make the mistake. Ventral root surrounds the motor neuron. Dorsal root surrounds the sensory neuron. Please do not make that mistake. Then here we have the spinal nerve. This side and this side is basically a copy and paste of what we looked at there. So the part that I highlighted as green, that is what we call white matter. And the part that has all these dots there, that is what we call gray matter. I don't know why it's not yellow, but it was yellow before. Okay, then there's a dot over there in the middle that is called the central canal. And that is all you have to know for labeling a diagram of the spinal cord. Okay. Now, the functions of the spinal cord, it provides a pathway for nerve impulses to and from the brain, and the spinal cord serves as a center for reflex actions. This is going to be very important when we're going to be doing a simple reflex action, because this diagram, not every single part, but it is involved in a simple reflex action as to how a simple reflex action happens. So you have to know and you have to understand this diagram. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at the peripheral nervous system, which consists of the nerves, 12 pairs of cranial nerves, which are connected to the brain, and 31 pairs of spinal nerves, which are connected to the spinal cord. Okay, now it's divided into two, with the first being the somatic nervous system, and this controls voluntary muscles. Remember what voluntary is? You decide if you want to do it. You decide if you want to walk. You decide if you want to run. You decide if you want to jog. Those are voluntary actions that are controlled by your voluntary muscles. Then we have number two, automatic nervous system. Remember, automatic, your brain does it for you, meaning it's involuntary. So this part controls the involuntary muscles. For example, sneezing, breathing, your heart beating. You do not control all of that, even your blinking. Okay? Then the automatic nervous system has two subdivisions. Sorry for the typing error there. It's called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. Now, before we dive into those, I don't know if you've ever heard of something called fight or flight mode. Like, for example, if you are in a situation, let's say a dog is chasing you, your body has either two options, to fight or flight. Fight is basically to stay there, protect yourself while you are there, or flight mode where you just pick up and start running. So sympathetic division, it prepares your body for the emergency. The emergency is fight or flight. Are you going to now stay and fight, or are you going to now pick up and start running? Then parasympathetic, after all that adrenaline pumping is happening, your body returns back to normal. All of that energy and everything, it goes back to normal. So sympathetic, your body is preparing to fight or flight. There's an emergency. All the adrenaline is pumping, all the hormones for energy and everything is going up. Parasympathetic, your body goes back to normal. Right, so now we are going to be looking at the simple reflex action. But before we get into the whole steps and the whole process of how it works, we are going to first define what a reflex action is. And it's an automatic, remember automatic, it's involuntary. Automatic response to a stimulus that is received by an organ or a receptor. Then a reflex arc is the process or the path taken by an impulse in bringing about a response to a stimulus during an action. So a reflex is basically something that just happens naturally. You don't have to think about it, it just happens. For example, say you are in grade 12A, the quietest class, and you're in 12, and then there's 12B, the class that is the horrendous, horrible class. Your teacher is teaching a class, and then, for example, 12A decides to be naughty. And instead of your teacher saying, hey, 12A, can you please keep quiet? Your teacher says, 12B, can you please keep quiet? Because it's a reflex. It's something that they used to always saying. It's not something that they always say all the time as 12A, keep quiet. It's normally 12B. So that's just a simple example of what a reflex is. It's something that has happened automatically. You don't think about it. Okay. So below is a diagram of a simple reflex action that you need to know and need to understand. And remember what I said, the spinal cord is there. So if you do not understand the spinal cord, what goes where, you are going to struggle here. Okay. So the first part we have here is called A, or step 1, the receptor. Over here, we have a person putting their finger over a flame, or you can even imagine it as a baby putting their hand on a stove, a hot surface, or touching hot water, for example. So, a structure which receives a stimulus and converts it into an impulse. The heat sensor of the finger feels burn. So, for example, if you are now pouring water in the bathtub to bath in the middle of winter, and you accidentally touch the hot water, your hand automatically moves away from it. We are now at the beginning of that, where your hand is there, and the heat sensor in your finger is picking up that this is a very, 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 very hot substance. That's where we are right now. Okay, so now we're going to move along that process. Where we are, step 2, which is the sensory neuron. Remember sensory neuron, what does it do? It carries the impulse from the receptor to the spinal cord. We are now going here. That is step 2 or B. Then we are now at C, or step 3, the interneuron. It carries the impulse from the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. Okay? Then we are now by D, where what? It's going now back. It carries the impulse from the spinal cord to the effectors. And then lastly, we have the effector, a structure which produces the reaction, which is the muscles in the finger contract and the finger is pulled away. So that's basically the process of if you now accidentally put your hand in hot water and your hand automatically moves away. I know it might feel like you are the one that did that, but please don't try this at home. It's a reflex action. Your body already knows that this is a foreign thing. What's happening? We need to move away from it. It's your body in a way trying to protect you. So if you are studying for the exam, all you need to remember is its receptor, sensory neuron, interneuron, motor neuron, and effector. Those steps, and you should be fine. But obviously you have to remember the diagram of the spinal cord in order to understand that this is the sensory neuron, this is the interslash connected, and then going back we have the motor. Now we're at the end of the video where we're going to be looking at the disorders of the central nervous system. You just need to know these two. You need to know their symptoms and what they are. Very, very simple. So the first one we have is Alzheimer's disease, which occurs when the healthy neurons become less and less efficient. Okay, and symptoms include memory loss and confusion. We have multiple sclerosis, which is a disease that results in the white matter of the brain and the spinal cord being attacked and damaged by the body's immune system. Remember, white matter and gray matter? So if you understand the spinal cord, you understand what multiple sclerosis is. That's why I'm telling you it's very, very, very important. Okay, an immune system, you should know what immune system is. You know, when you go to the doctor and they tell you, oh, your immune system is high, meaning that you don't really get sick very easily, or your immune system is low, you get sick very easily. That is what an immune system is. Okay, and the symptoms of multiple sclerosis is that it includes loss of speech, vision, pain, and fatigue. Fatigue is basically like extreme tiredness, if that makes sense. So yeah, so please do not say tiredness or extreme tiredness in the exam. Say fatigue. That is the right term to use when you are giving the symptoms of multiple sclerosis. Okay, I hope this video was very helpful and beneficial. Thank you for watching. Bye.